Just a heads up, this show contains conversations about eating disorders and mental health struggles. If you're affected by what you hear, please see the show notes for links on where you can receive help. Hi, I'm Joe Hart and welcome to Footballers Unfiltered. I know what you're thinking, and no, this is not another football podcast. This is a show brought to you by FIFPRO, the Global Union for Professional Football Players, which is bringing real conversations amongst the players on and off the pitch today to you. The Drake Football Study is a 10-year project tracking both the physical and mental health of footballers today. Last summer, they released findings which showed that 20% of all women footballers have reported some form of disordered eating in the last 12 months, which makes this a significant issue in the game today.
I think because I've experienced where I've had games where I've had no energy. You know, because I was so obsessed, I wouldn't eat maybe a really like a high carb dinner the day before. Like for me now, every pre-match I have pasta, regardless if it's 12 o'clock kickoff, I'm eating pasta at 9 o'clock, you know, because I feel best when I've had that. And it was until I had that reality check that I was like, I'm not performing, I'm going to get dropped. Like I'm not at my best right now. And then I really said, okay, food is my fuel. Food is good for me.
Molly Bartrip is a footballer working hard to bring attention to health and well-being. This is why she's our guest today on the episode of Footballers Unfiltered.
You know, naturally every club should have a psychologist and a nutritionist. But with them, I think you have to have a healthy relationship. I think I've experienced where having a psychologist looks like a negative. And I don't think from a manager's point of view, a coach's point of view, it should ever be seen as that. I actually think it should be seen as, you know what, they're trying to help themselves to be brilliant for me on the Sunday or a Saturday, not the opposite.
Before Molly joins us, I'm going to have a chat with Dr. Alex Culvin from FIFPRO. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
And can you tell us a little bit about your role in FIFPRO?
So I'm the Director of Global Policy and Strategic Relations for women's football at FIFPRO, which is the global trade union of professional footballers. I'm a former player, so I've played for Leeds, Everton, AZ Alkmaar, and I finished my career at Liverpool, which is the club I support.
Quality. So we're going to be talking about in this episode with Molly about disordered eating. I think I know a little bit about eating disorders, but would you be able to just differentiate between the two?
I mean, there is always conflation from the two concepts. I think to say it in the most basic terms, an eating disorder is something that's clinically diagnosed by a medical professional, and a disordered eating is more about like an unhealthy relationship with food, and that can come in many different ways, and there's loads of variables to that.
So looking at the Drake Football Study, it showed that it's prevalent in the women's game. The more I've thought about it and the more I've looked at my own career, I'd definitely say that in the men's game as well, food is being seen more as a fuel rather than something that you can enjoy.
I can see that, and when I seen the research come out from the Drake Football Study, I was not surprised by the findings. Like 20% of players experience an unhealthy relationship with food. And I think from a young age, whether you're male or female, when you enter the system of football, food is a controlled substance. It's something that's used only for performance. It's not really talked about that much in the women's game. I think it's an endemic issue, to be honest. I think a lot of players probably have an unhealthy relationship with food and don't really recognise it as such because it's so normalised. And I think it's such an important topic and one that I'm glad we're covering today.
I think that's a perfect point. We can bring Molly in and we can hear her story and how she's trying to raise awareness in the game today. Okay, so Molly, Dr. Alex, welcome. Thank you very much for coming on. Molly, the floor is yours. Really interesting story. I know you want to help. I know you want to get your message out there. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up playing football, you know. I think the women's game is very different now to what it was when I was growing up. When I was around 14, I was in, the England squads like you were when you were younger, and I kind of was just like going with the flow of life.
Like you were. Come on, Molly, not everyone just gets in England squads.
Well, yeah, that's true.
You're at the top end.
Yeah.
And you were just playing with absolute freedom and the joy of football.
I wasn't thinking, I was just playing.
I can relate.
And then one time I got injured, and if I'm honest, I didn't even know what an injury was back then. I was 14. Like, I pulled my hamstring and I was like, right, and I can go and train, right? I had no idea. And my whole family, it was an England away game. We were playing Holland. It was like the first fixture. And I was like, oh, this is pressure. You know, my mum and dad are watching, my nan and granddad, my brother, who absolutely hates football. So he was just there for the vibes.
Yeah.
And it was mad because like, I thought this was my opportunity. And the day before I got injured and they told me you can't play, I almost felt like I was never going to get that chance again. And when you're so young, you genuinely feel like that. And I really didn't know where to go. And I got back to England and it was like, okay, I was back at club football, which was Arsenal at the time. And I got back into training. You know, so when you're young, injuries don't really last that long they do now. And for some reason, my mind just had a switch. I felt not good enough. I didn't think my family were proud of me. There was so many things that was going on in my brain. And if I'm honest, I was kind of a happy child. I didn't really fear anything. Like, I was just, going with the flow of life. I had no control over England selection, Arsenal selection, but I had control of what I was putting in my body. Yeah. Okay, I'm just not going to eat. You know, to other people, it was maybe me just concentrating on getting fitter, looking better. But it got to the point where I got caught throwing food away at school. And then my friend told my mum, and I was like, no, I've been caught. And then my mum was like, we're going to the doctors. And I was refusing to kind of accept that I was ill. I don't think anybody wants to know that ill.
I was going to say, did you know you were being caught, or was it something that you were gradually doing? Did you know that you were doing something that would be perceived as wrong?
I knew I was being crafty.
Yeah.
But I didn't think I was ill. I didn't want to accept I was being ill.
Well, you wouldn't know.
Nobody would want to. So it was kind of like, oh, no, I'm just, doing me at that time. But then when I got to the doctors, and to be fair, my mum basically dragged me there, and I did a few questionnaires, like I filled out a few forms, and she was like, you've got anorexia. And I didn't even know what it was. So I was like, what does that mean? And she was like listing these things that I had to do. I've got to go and see a counsellor every week. I've got to do a food diary. I've got to weigh myself. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I was 14 years old. I didn't even know what was going on in my life. Yeah. Forget football. I didn't even think about football at that time because all I was concentrating on was what I was putting in my body. It was horrible.
And at the start, when you were trying to gain the control, that was obviously football based.
Yeah.
In your head, how did you think that was going to help the football recovery and help your path back to being in England and a professional footballer?
I feel like I completely removed football from my brain at that time because all I could think about was this thing on my shoulder. I describe it as someone on my shoulder was telling me everything. I knew the calories in like a raspberry. I knew the fat content in everything. It was like I was obsessed. And it takes a lot of energy when you're like that. You know, anybody in any type of life, with football, you become obsessed with it. Yeah. Looking back on it, I didn't necessarily know what I was doing to my family either. I can imagine as a parent and you're seeing your child hurt themselves, harm themselves, stop themselves from living a normal life. It must be horrible.
Growing up, I was the same. I was previous to you in terms of 14. I just played the game, just loved it, put myself out there. And I was lucky enough I didn't suffer an injury. But now I can kind of see, I've got a 10-year-old son who plays football. Yeah. And when you're a kid and when it's just you, that's all you're thinking about. You're not aware that you're being selfish. You're not aware that what you do affects anyone else. And now as a parent, when I see my son and things start to change, it's amazing how that feeling flips and how you think, oh my goodness me, like what must I put my family through? And I mean that in general. I don't mean your circumstance. Yeah. I just mean as a child. So when you were able to diagnose and your mum was able to get you in front of a doctor, how was that feeling and how was that dynamic?
It felt like I'd been caught. So it felt like I lost in a way. Yeah. Because it was then I really had to accept I wasn't well and I had this illness. And I didn't want to accept it, but I also didn't want the help that I was supposed to get from the counsellor. I refused the counsellor sessions for a long time or my mum would take me and I would just sit there and not say anything. Even to my mum when she was like, what's up? Like, talk to me. I'd be like, Mum, I'm fine. Yeah. And she's like, well, you're clearly not, Molly, But the counsellor told me, why don't you write to the illness? And originally I thought, what is she on about? She's got to be crazy, this woman. And she was like, write to the illness, we called it Anna. Yep. To Anna, and write what she's doing to your life. So that evening I sat in my bedroom. I always locked my door because I didn't want anyone to come in. I was like kind of super private at that time. And I was like, to Anna, you are ruining my life. What are you doing to me? The illness wasn't Molly. This Anna had control of me at that time. But the best thing for me was to remove that and to go, okay, who do I want to be as a person? That's the illness. Don't allow it to come together. And that was the beginning of kind of me accepting it and me realising that I needed to get out of it. But now I kind of can look back on all of that, look back on the past and go, it was just a path for me.
Yeah.
I think more people need to talk about it because it's actually something that most people do go through, or they know someone that's gone through. And I think that's why I've always wanted to talk so openly about it, is because I know that there's people out there suffering. I've seen it, I've heard it, and now that's all I want to do is help.
Well, I think it's so interesting and so powerful what you're doing. And when I knew that I was going to speak to you, and I started to think about my football career and how it's changed, the dietitian and, the constant weighing and things like that, which, as I'm now older, I totally understand. But I even had a stage in my life, and it really jogged my memory. I moved to Italy when I was about 29. And it was at the time where I didn't go deep into what diets were, but I'd heard about pasta and carbs, and they were some sort of like enemy, and you should be careful of them. And I moved to Italy, the home of pasta and pizza. I grew up, again, like I told you, up to 14, you had this, but I had it till about 25. I didn't think. I just played, I ate, I partied, I trained, and I got better. Then things went a little bit left for me. I had a moment where I was taken away from what was my trajectory in terms of my Manchester City and England career. And I moved, and this was the exact time. And I went to Italy, and I said to my wife, I was like, we're going to the pasta and pizza center. I can't eat it. I can't eat it. I don't want to eat it. I need to be really dedicated in training. And I was fine. And I was finding myself tired in training, actually, which I've never felt. I'm full of energy. And I look back and I see pictures now, super ripped. But I wasn't me. I'm better a little bit. I weigh in a little bit heavy, a little bit chunky, but comfortable diving around. And it was really interesting how mentally I put myself in a space of not being aware that I was trying to fit to what I needed to look like, because in Italy, they're old school, the calipers every week, food diaries every week. And I don't know about you, you always kind of like taper it down to make yourself look like this perfect pro. When you probably should just be being honest, because you're trying to get medical help, right?
Yeah.
And healthcare, and people are technically there to help you. But you kind of create it in your head that you need to just give this image of who you are and what you are. And it's something that I noticed energy-wise. I don't know about you, how that's affected you, but that was just something that really struck home with me.
Yeah.
And then I had a moment where I was like, why am I trying to live up to anyone else rather than just do what I want to do?
Yeah.
And my energy came straight back, and my strength and my power. All right, I didn't look as good, but I felt good.
I had very similar. I thought carbs were my enemy.
Yeah.
So I didn't eat them for a really long time.
Can I just ask, Molly? So you said you knew the calories of a raspberry. Did you just find yourself gradually going down different wormholes that eventually led you to saying that everything was the enemy? Right. Okay.
It would tell me if I've exercised, how many calories I'd burn, and I became obsessed.
What did you match it against in terms of, or were you just going against yourself?
I was going against myself.
Right.
Because I became so obsessed with everything I put in my body. I wanted to know the calories. I wanted to know the fat content. My mum was very sneaky, and she was very smart. She did a lot of research. My mum's my best friend. And I think when you know your daughter's struggling, there's nothing you want more than to help them.
Yeah.
And my mum did a lot of research on anorexia and spoke to people that have had children with anorexia and what she could do. And my mum used to lie to me, to be fair. She used to, with butter, margarine, she used to take butter out of its tin and put in fat butter, higher fat butter. But she was trying everything possible just to trick me. She would tell me a sweet potato was butternut squash, or vice versa. We had a family cottage in the countryside, and she was like, we're going away. And my mum, the first thing she said to me when we were there was, I'm going to eat exactly the same as you. My head went. It was gone.
Yep. This
illness was making me a very nasty person. And I got took away from school, lunches had to be supervised and stuff like that. It got to that point. I went to hospital to get tube fed. And that was one of the moments that it woke me up a little bit. And I was like, what am I doing here? And the moment my parents kind of left to go to the waiting area, it made me feel sick.
Yep.
And it made me realise, I need to sort myself out. And I'm not even going to have a life, let alone play a football ever again.
How did you come to terms with that? Because it sounds like it's the kind of thing, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Alex, that it could really just completely take over you.
Yeah. It sounded like it spiralled, and you lost the control of the thing that was you wanted to control, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think there was a few triggers. So that time I went to hospital was one. The other one, I was in America with my family. They'd booked this amazing trip to Orlando, going all the theme parks, amazing experience. Yeah, so cool. We were going, and we were with another family and they were like, right, you know, what food do you want? And I was like, yeah, I can't eat that. So every morning my mum would make a basic ham plain sandwich and I would sit there, they're all eating their fast food, chips, whatever, and I would have this sandwich and I would take all the crusts off and there would just be this tiny little bit and I would eat that and then that would be like it. But I remember specifically like being there and we were in the hotel and I was looking through and there was a squad photo of the Arsenal girls that I was supposed to play with the following year. And I looked and I was like, I can't play with them. Look at the size of them. And I looked at myself and that was like one of the first times I looked at myself and was like, I'm skinny. I don't look healthy. But America was a wake-up call. Yeah. You know, it was that moment that I was like, okay, if I'm going to play football again, I need to start really fighting it. The one food that I loved since I was a kid, I had it every single morning before a game, was a bacon sandwich. Yeah. Loved a bacon sandwich. And that was the one food it took me 5 years to get back into me. I couldn't eat it. I don't know why. There was just this mind block. And I knew I hadn't recovered from anorexia properly until I would eat it and be happy with it and not feel guilt. And I remember I was at Reading at the time and the girls had ordered a Domino's after the game. And I was eating normally-ish by 19, but that was the one thing I couldn't eat. And with this Texas barbecue pizza, it had bacon on it. And I was like, no, I can't eat it. And then I looked at it and I thought, I can do this. Yeah, come on. Yeah. And as soon as I ate it, I'm on the phone to my mum and I've done it. I've done it. I don't even feel bad for it. I loved it. Yeah. And it was like the biggest weight off my shoulders ever. Like, I can't even explain the feeling because it was like, I've just defeated something. Like, I've actually just beat the illness. And when you feel so trapped in something like for such a long time and made me be somebody I didn't want to be able to actually say I did it was like, amazing.
From 14 is so young, but you're integrated into a system from even younger. So it's like all of the pressures of you playing football, you wanted to get back to playing football, but you had this kind of like illness. But it's a very formative period to like be there and now look back to where you are. It must seem like not you in some ways.
It doesn't. And I think when I talk to some of the girls at, at football about it, and maybe they've read my story online or something, and they're like, you would not think you've gone through any of that. And I'm like, really? And they're like, no, I wouldn't even assume you've had anything. And I'm like, no, I've had stuff. I put a lot of pressure on myself. I've always been my worst critic. I'm sure you were. And 100%. I put so much like doubt in my own head that I wasn't good enough that I almost caused my own mental health issues in that way. So when I was 21, 22, I was at Reading. I had a few problems at home and I was kind of battling in my own brain with that, but I didn't think anything of it. And I just remember in a session, I just broke down. I just cried. And I remember the manager coming to me and she was like, what's up?
What did you say when she asked you if you were all right?
I didn't know what to say because I thought I was fine, but I'm clearly not fine. I'm crying.
Yeah.
The thing is with mental health is I feel like back then it was seen as a weakness. Yeah. I think even now it could be seen as a weakness. I don't want to believe that because I think what I've been through takes strength.
There's many rooms now where your strength will be celebrated, but I do agree with you that that almost just that feeling of if it is going to be slightly 1% perceived as weakness, that's the 1% you're going to focus on, right?
100%.
Not the 99% of people going, Molly, come here, like I've got you, or I feel something very similar and this is how I deal with it.
Yeah, it's proper taboo though, isn't it?
It was. No one wanted to mention it. No one wanted to say anything. So it was kind of like, I don't want to say anything about me maybe not feeling my best. So
I was going to ask, did you have a Molly to look up to in any of these moments?
No, because nobody spoke about mental health. There wasn't somebody that I could go, they've been through it too, let me fight.
Yeah.
Because they did it, which is why I want to talk about it now.
100%.
Because a young girl, a young boy could be looking up to me and going, well, if Molly did it, I can do it. I can fight if Molly fought, and I always say like, I'm not the bravest, I'm not the strongest. I wouldn't say mentally I'm the strongest at all, actually, but I did it. I defeated it.
Yeah.
When I was 21. I remember, waking up and going, something's not right with me. And the girls were all getting ready to go to training. And I was like, why do I not want to go to training? And they were like, come on, Mol, let's go. And I was like, no, I'm not coming.
Yeah.
And that one day where I didn't go to training and I stayed in my bed all day turned into a week.
Oh, so you did make that decision, yeah?
And then it turned into 2 weeks. And then my mum's like, what's up? And I'm like, nothing's going on. No, Molly, you need to come home because I know you're not training. I was like, okay. I came home And then again, the same doctor, she was like, what are you doing back here again? And again, similar, did questionnaires, and she was like, Molly, you've got severe depression and anxiety. And I was like, you are joking.
And what was football doing to help you at this point?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
At the time, nothing, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
It was confusing for me at the time because it almost felt like my depression was harder than my anorexia because I didn't understand it. With the anorexia, I knew there was someone there talking to me.
And it's physical, isn't it? So you can like see it, whereas depression's very different.
People can have no idea you're suffering with depression.
Yeah.
Again, it took me a couple of years to understand and to accept myself, that's part of me. I think even now, I'm 28 and I still suffer from anxiety every day. And it's tough. Like, I fight with my brain all the time, and I feel like it's a bit draining because I've done it since I was 14, and I've almost had this fight that has been continuous. It's never really left me. I have come to terms with, I think this is kind of who I am now, and I've like accepted that side of me, but I don't want to have to fight every day. It's tiring.
Yeah.
I still get panic attacks. I had one recently.
Yeah.
And it's mad to see how other people react to you, because I think not everyone sees someone have a panic attack.
I wouldn't know what to say personally.
Yeah,
I've not experienced
and that's totally fine.
I just think the education needs to be there as to what, because it's if you flip it and say, we're weighing because we want you to be at your optimum weight, and if that's a little bit higher, then so like constantly flipping it to optimum. But I think that, like you said, now it's just like, if you're a footballer, you're going to get weighed, you're going to have your diet monitored, but like, if you're educated to why that is...
Yeah, if there's a reason, justification almost.
It's not you being policed. It's we're trying to give you like all the tools and every bit of information to get the best out of yourself. That's where I think the problem is.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that's being translated to young footballers, young players, men, women.
I'd agree.
It feels like a policing, and that's how I look at it from my career. Yeah. Not to any extreme levels, but especially now, fat tested and things like that. You didn't look forward to those days, like petrified. No. Whereas, like you say, they're being done to help you.
Yeah.
So I think that message can be a whole lot clearer.
And I think as well in women's football, I think because body shapes for women are so, like, the scale is really broad, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And I think if you look at like the young players now coming in, they're entering an environment where food is used for fuel. Mm-hmm. It's not just like, I'm just going to have a burger and enjoy it.
Yeah.
So as soon as you're kind of in that mindset and everything that you eat is like related to, will it help me sprint? Will it help me lift that weight?
Yeah.
And I think that these kind of almost like traditional things that we do, some are scientifically proven, some less so, really influence like, one, the perception of your body, but also two, kind of like the perception of your performance related to your physique, let's say, and whether you look lean or whether you look like muscular or whatever it is. And for a woman, it's much harder to build muscle than it is for men,
Also, people perform better in different ways. Like you were saying, when you're a little bit, stronger, you feel like you're going to dive better.
Yeah.
It's the same in anything. Like for me, I don't weigh myself because if I feel good on the pitch, I know I'm at a good weight. I know I'm fine. But when you become obsessed, it's a little bit different, because I think people think, if I'm the leanest, I've got the least body fat, then I'm going to run better. Well, not necessarily. Yeah. You could actually be more prone to injury. I
was playing in the Netherlands for AZ Alkmaar, and I was so thin, and obviously I'm small anyway. And I think I was 7 and a bit stone, so I was tiny. But because I was playing away, I'd come home and all of my mates would be like, you look amazing, because they didn't play football, so they'd think, you look really thin and like amazing. Yeah. But I was so exhausted when I was playing football. Everything that I'd eat, I wouldn't weigh it and be, as extreme as like being clinically diagnosed. Yeah. But I had an unhealthy relationship with food, and it was purely based on, one, people's perceptions of me, i.e. I look good, quote unquote, and two, I was playing professional football, so I must be doing something right because I'm playing at a very high standard of football. Yeah. And so that kind of like public perception of people as well, it proper influences like what you put in your body, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So how have you got yourself in a space where you feel like you have a healthy relationship with food again?
I think because I've experienced where I've had games where I've had no energy. Yep. Because I was so obsessed I wouldn't eat maybe a really like a high carb dinner the day before. Like for me now, every pre-match I have pasta, regardless if it's 12 o'clock kickoff. I'm eating pasta at 9 o'clock, you know, because I feel best when I've had that.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, before I would have like a slice of toast, maybe in the evening before a game. And then I would go to the game and I would feel like I'm getting battered everywhere. I'm against these tall strikers and I'm small and I would just be bouncing off them. And it was until I had that reality check that I was like, I'm not performing. I'm going to get dropped. Like I'm not at my best right now. And then I really like said, okay, food is my fuel. Food is good for me.
Yep.
Were you able to have a conversation with a nutritionist? Were you able to have a conversation with people at your club?
We didn't have nutritionists back then.
Right.
Now we do. At Spurs we do now.
Yeah.
But back then we didn't have nutritionists. We didn't even have psychologists. To be fair, the men's side did, but the women's side didn't, which is something that I feel like we're seeing a lot more in the women's game, is that we're getting women psychologists come to the first team too. That has to happen. I think it has to be compulsory, if I'm honest. Yeah, we put so much emphasis on injuries in football, but why do we not for the mental side of the game? Because I think it's an asset.
Yeah.
I think if you can give that 1-2 extra 3% mentally, that can win you a game.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think from an idol point of view, you can get lost in thinking who looks good in a kit or who plays well in a kit.
Yeah. Definitely.
I think that will give you a real strength, because I would obviously look at images of myself and I look good, but I need to look when I'm playing well in goal.
Yeah.
Which is my job, which is the best thing for me. And I know when I'm playing well in goal, I look differently. And the majority of the time, luckily enough for me, I understood that and I knew where I wanted to be. I'm thinking idol-wise for you, who are you looking up to in the women's game?
Farrah Williams.
And did you look up to her from her ability or from how she looked, or a combination
100%
of both?
ability.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was technical. I was like, I love it. You know, Kelly Smith and Farrah Williams for me, like obviously growing up like through the Arsenal youth, they were two that I just thought, whoa, they're head and shoulders above the rest.
Molly, you know, when I did research back in 2019 on like the England players playing in England, and everything that come back to me was around like players and the treatment of the club. So like when players were coming back a little bit overweight, they were put in this quote unquote fat club.
Yeah, been there.
And like carbs are the devil because of the nutritional value. What would be your vision for the women's game in the future? Because I know like at one point you're going to retire. So like how would you like to see that for the future?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Naturally, every club should have a psychologist and a nutritionist. But with them, I think you have to have a healthy relationship. I think I've experienced where having a psychologist looks like a negative.
Yeah.
And I don't think from a manager's point of view, a coach's point of view, it should ever be seen as that. I actually think it should be seen as, you know what, they're trying to help themselves to be brilliant for me on the Sunday or a Saturday, not the opposite. Oh, they're going through something at home, or maybe they're not ready for the game on Sunday.
Need to drop them, yeah.
Well, even the naming of it, I had a mental coach, psychologist, how you want to call it, a mental coach, because he said, I'm here to improve your mind, improve your mentality.
Yeah.
And football is what, 90% probably in your mind, isn't it, really?
And that's what I mean. And we don't think about, we think about the injury side and the physio side. But I do think, you know, for women's football, that's something that's why I want to talk about it, because I do think there's a long way to go. But we're getting there. You know, we are seeing more. Like, I'm so proud of Spurs because we have both a psychologist and a nutritionist. And the relationship that the players have with both of them is top.
Do they work together?
Yeah. Yeah, they work together.
I've never thought of it like that, but like, what a great combination that would be. It wouldn't just be the psychologist for the players, it would be the psychologist for all the coaches, for everyone involved.
That's the thing people don't think.
The best way to communicate.
Of course everyone needs it. Of course, you know, for a manager, when maybe your team's losing 3-4 games in a trot, do you not think that they need to talk to someone?
Yeah.
Of course they do. And I think that's the thing. It's not just for the players, it's for everyone. And I think that's obviously what we do at Spurs. It is for everyone. And I've always said, I think talking is a good thing. I don't see that as a negative at all. I think obviously I clearly talk a lot, but I think it is good to be open and honest and get things out of people, because that's when you learn. Yeah. That's when you grow as individuals too.
Yeah.
I think it'll be really important to encourage your club. You have to feel safe.
Yeah.
You have to feel safe in your club environment.
Yeah.
You have to be able to walk into there and feel like whatever's being said, however big your world is in terms of your world level, if you like, that's where you feel safe. You can have conversations if you're struggling or if you need help with things. And I just think that that's something I've seen really improve in the men's game But it's just now the message is just a little bit skewed in terms of like, you've got this guy to help you for this guy to help you for this. But it's general, really. It's a whole team effort.
It is.
You know, comfortable with the families, with the friends, and then just staying strong and being aware that whatever anyone else who doesn't have the information or isn't necessarily educated, their opinion is their opinion, but it's over there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to kind of block that in a way. Yeah. I feel like I've had to learn that the hard way, but I've definitely had to train my brain with that and like accept that there's going to be people that have opinions and maybe they don't rate you, but what I do, you know, for the manager, what I do for the team is important. That's what I'm focusing on. It's took me a long time to get to that point, to be fair.
So Molly, thank you very much for your time. And at the end of every podcast, we're going to try and ask guests 2 questions. First one being, Molly, what message would you give to a young Molly?
I would say to enjoy the good moments of life. I think naturally with what I've been through, I've kind of seen all of those as negatives, but actually they've kind of paved the way for me in my journey. And I think if I would have like looked at them back then as this is just part of my path, I would have kind of accepted it a bit quicker. And we should really treasure those moments. You know, those times where you're playing in front of 20,000 people is what you dreamt of as a little girl. And I think that's definitely what I would tell my younger self is just, treasure the good moments, because sometimes we overthink all the negatives.
100%. And finally, Molly, what do you love about being a professional footballer?
I think it's the fans. For us as female footballers now, we're paving the way for the future. We want the women's game to grow as quickly and as big as possible. And I think naturally with that, I want every girl in the stand, you know, to feel like I can be one of those girls. That's like the most amazing feeling for me is when you're going on, you're signing autographs after and they think, oh, I played for a women's team today, or I played for a girls' team today, and you've made me want to play football. I think that's why I play, you know, and I think that's the best thing about the game is the fans.
It's a great message, and thank you very much for your time, Molly.
Thank you.
Well, Alex, I really enjoyed that conversation with Molly. Certainly raised my awareness of disordered eating in football. Definitely made me think about my career and my relationship with food. Anything that you learned from it?
What I'm most kind of like energised and surprised by with Molly is kind of the journey. So she's had so many setbacks and had so many mental challenges, and she's still able to perform at the highest level today. And not only perform, she loves the game. You could see it when you're asked her about, you know, what's the best thing about being a professional footballer, you know, she lit up. And I think professional football, and it gets a lot of criticisms for the negative impacts that it has on the players, but it's also a driver for people's like experiences and happiness ultimately. And I think that's something that we should recognise as well.
And my mind started working as we were talking about how football can improve, the game can improve, and I think it's just the relationship and the communication in the game. Education is 100% what needs to be at the forefront of this, allowing people to understand themselves and understand their bodies. But I feel like communication is going to be key in all of this. Yeah,
and I think as well, football can do more. You know, I think for the women's game and I guess where it is in this kind of growth trajectory and full professionalisation and this acceleration of professionalisation, we can't forget the key components of enabling players to go and perform, and nutrition and mental health support and psychologists are fundamental to resourcing the game properly.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Footballers Unfiltered, a show brought to you by FIFPRO, bringing real conversations amongst the players today to you. Footballers Unfiltered is recorded at Spotify Studios and is available on all podcast platforms, so make sure you give us a follow. But if you want that up close and personal experience, you can watch each and every episode on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Joe Hart, and this has been Footballers Unfiltered. See you next time.